All right. Hello and good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the world. Welcome to the Future Law Virtual Summit, Negotiating the New Normal. We have a very special guest with us today, Carin, who is the co-founder of the Future of Governance Agency. And she will be talking a little bit about digital jurisdictions with us today and the importance of that in, well, negotiating the new normal. So Carin, I'd love to invite you to just briefly introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about how you came to do the work that you're now doing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Samir. I think maybe the best way to introduce what I do now and what I've been interested in for a long time is how do we architect power? Who gets to make decisions under what circumstances? What does power look like in our world right now? And what would we like it to look like? Because I think when you look at any situation with that lens, things become quite apparent that otherwise can be, if not hidden, then at least not made completely visible. There are so many distracting events, so many distracting practices and occurrences and topic of conversations. But when you start to really see what drives the world, why does the world look the way it looks right now, it comes down to how power is distributed. And so what I do more concretely is the last couple of years, I've been compiling the established tools for power, for control, as well as the emerging tools. Many of the emerging tools, of course, have to do with our digital world. And that's what I'll be talking a little bit about today. But that is being compiled or has been compiled into a book that I've written together with Dr. Julian Lair, which is called How to Rule a World. And that book, we're going to see with COVID exactly what moment we will publish it, but it's a collaborative effort also that we want to continue to invite people to iterate on, to create like a common go-to shop for anyone who wants to learn about those fundamentals of power and control, that they're going to be as relevant whether or not you're trying to create a new UN or a new state or want to see how your own life on a more private level is governed as well. So that's the sort of overview. But today we're going to focus on digital jurisdictions, because that's what I'm hoping that the community around the Future Law Summit here will be able to hopefully contribute to.
Wonderful. Looking forward to that, Carin. So please get started whenever you're ready, and then, yeah, take it away.
Absolutely. So digital jurisdictions, I've named this a call and an uprising because that's where we are at right now. We need an uprising, and there is a necessity to call on legal professionals to organize around this topic. But what is this topic? For the obvious starting point is, what is a jurisdiction? And classically, it is something quite territorial. It is territory-based. It is the rules that are in place at a certain place, at a certain physical place, and then the enforcement of those rules. And currently, when we're seeing discussions about what COVID has catalyzed or propelled or created in the world, we tend to see things that really focus still on territory. Let's see if I can switch slides. Yeah. So this, for example, I think is very interesting when you're coming at those topics, how the world has changed and is changing from the lens of democracy. This is created by IDEA, which is a watchdog organization for how democracy is doing, what's the state of democracy in different parts of the world. And again, they're talking territory-based. You can go in here and you can see which civil liberties are breached or respected in what areas. And all these little exclamation marks are places, physical places in the world where regimes have, in one way or another, either actively used or because of how they are handling the ongoing pandemic, are breaching civil liberties in one way or another, or are undermining the democracy that might be completely in place or partly in place. So I would urge anyone interested in that to check out this further. And this is something that is continuously updated. And so when you see, if you would ever Google or see in your feed articles right now about the sort of state of democracy, these are the kind of things that will come up. Things that again relate to territory. But what is the big learning when it comes to what is ongoing, what COVID is making us or fast tracking us into? I would argue that it is this. It is dematerialized beings. It is the rise that was underway already, but that has definitely sped up now. It's the rise of the ephemeral world order, the dematerialized world order. And that is a world where, yes, we are still embodied, we still need food, we still need water and shelter, but so much of our lives are spent chasing connections, chasing knowledge, chasing feelings. And all of those things were things that we used to do physically as well. But we are now doing those things in this cyberspace Zoom world where this conference, as so many other conferences and events this year, are taking place. And then the big question is, what is that world like? When it comes to democracy, when it comes to rules, who sets the rules, and how are the rules in our digital sphere enforced? And currently, there is an answer to that question. And that is that even though I'm currently in Sweden, which is a democracy that usually rates very high in terms of respect for civil liberties and so on, but every time I pick up my device, or every time I, in this case, stare into a video, a webcam of sorts, I leave that democracy. It's like a magic trick. Every time we pick up our phone, we leave democracies, if we are lucky enough to be one to begin with. And the reason we do that is we enter into jurisdictions, places where there are rules in place and there are ways to enforce those rules that are dictatorships. They are companies that do not give us, the users, the digital inhabitants, a way, a due process to impact the worlds we end up living in. So we are not forced to comply in the way that the monopoly of violence that has been effectuating rules on territories would usually force us to comply. But there are other ways to enact control. And what happens on digital platforms is that you code compliance, you automate compliance. So what that means is that you can only do the things that the system allows for you to do. You can only type as many characters as Twitter is currently allowing you to type. You can only post the kind of content that Facebook's algorithms will deem as appropriate. You can only interact with the smileys that are offered to you. These are your only choices. And that's the case as soon as we enter into platforms that don't give us a way to rewrite the world that we see. So there is, that I think many of you might be aware of, free software movement that has been very active since the very inception of the digital world, that advocates for a democratic way to go about platforms where you can both rewrite the code to what you see, so you can create your own world. And if you want to interact with other smileys, if you want to have other options, you can create those. But that's also a value in that free software movement that has to do with transparency. And this is really key, because in our physical world, having transparency around which rules we have to comply with, that's like the most obvious thing to us. That's what we call the rule of law. You have to know, you have to be able to know what rules are in place for those rules to be seen as legitimate or reasonable. But that's not the case at all if you are, for example, a creator on YouTube who doesn't know what the algorithm premieres, who doesn't know what kind of content will be demonetized or taken away. You don't have a due process for influencing what ends up being your world. You have no way of augmenting your digital world, and you don't even know what rules completely are in place. We know we can show nipples on Facebook, but like we don't know exactly what's going to give a certain story spin. And this we have sort of just so far maybe been annoyed with, but still we have accepted it. We've accepted it, and we have even been grateful. We've been happy that these big companies have offered us services that have made our lives more convenient. And that's very understandable, because they've been very good at taking credit for things that in many cases it's not the companies themselves that have developed. They haven't paid for the research and development that's been state funded to a large extent, like the classic example that all the things when the iPhone was presented that was in that iPhone came from, to one extent or another, state-funded projects, but Apple got the sort of all the goodwill from those innovations. And so we have had this gratitude, somewhat annoyed, somewhat grateful that these things exist at all. And we haven't yet stepped up to this moment where we demand to control it, to have the same ideals present as we have for every other aspect of our democracies, where we say we want to pick the leadership, we want to pick what is important, we want to have a say in how rules are made, we want to process for legislation. We have none of those things right now. So again, when we talk about how is Corona changing democracies and undermining it, it's not the question really of what is being taken away, but when are we going to introduce the values that we said that we hold so dear in this new space of ours? Because this is nowadays our world. And it's not like when Corona hopefully isn't that much of a presence in our lives anymore. We're going to go back and become these very physical beings again. It's quite the opposite. This has just catalyzed how many more innovations we will see in this space. And so from whether you're talking about the augmented reality experiences that Snapchat and Facebook are patenting and working to give us, which of course will give them in return an excuse to keep collecting data from us all the time, because that's what's going to happen when we're wearing their lenses or their glasses, and sort of spicing up our lives with whatever cooler version of reality that those devices can offer. That's going to, again, be an exchange where we are giving up more power to dictatorships. And the reason, of course, that companies are run like dictatorships is because we haven't sufficiently, we haven't gained sufficient belief in that we can produce goods and services through democratic means. And I don't think that people generally have reflected on how vast the ideals in place are that we claim will give a state. We say that if a state is run like a dictatorship, it will not deliver on the best interests of the people. But when it comes to a company, we suddenly say that they will. And this doesn't really, it's never really made sense. But right now, it's becoming so clear that it's not, there is no division anymore, because there isn't, the companies are taking this place in our lives that states used to have. And so if we want to see democratic ideals about people being able to control their world, then this is the moment that we need to step up and demand that. And we can demand it in several different ways. We can do it through, this is an excellent book. It's Tilted, it's called To Hack and To Own. It's by Nathan Schneider, and he talks about platform cooperativism here, which has to do with essentially owning and being able to thereby control what is the purpose of these platforms? Will they be delivering on what we want, or will they be trying to retain us, whether we want to be there or not? Will they lure us into a loop of endless scrolling, or will they help us do whatever we want to do and connect in whatever way we want to connect, in a way that isn't a distraction, but the very necessity and beauty of wanting togetherness at all? So that is one way forward, to create platforms on that basis. And there is, for example, alternatives already out there, like MeWe, like Elo, and so on. And these are two good resources if you want to find the different alternative to these platforms that are currently operating with what has become known as the surveillance capitalist model. But what I would say is that whoever creates the platform where we are able to not only hang out and do social things and entertaining things and have cool experiences together, but also, and this is when it becomes like really world changing, when we can start to bond together in a formal, legal way, to form insurance systems, to form systems, schemes of solidarity in the same way that has been done in nation states, but where we can do it with people that are in other locations, then that's the seed of the new world order, where we are bonding together around narratives, sort of like religions have been doing for thousands of years, saying that everyone who believes in this version or this interpretation of divinity will live and abide by this set of rules. And in the same way, we could create around narratives that are relevant right now, regardless of where we are. We could bond together legally and binding ourselves to each other, which would create the situation where if you have a certain ideology that you want to see effectuated, you would be able to effectuate it with other people who agree with the same thing. So I'm touching on different topics here, but the main thing, the main opportunity for legal professionals right now is to be a part of creating a design for what a democratic protocol for influence would look like on a platform that attempts to connect people to one another. What would Google's services look like if there was a due process to influence the rules that we then end up living under? What would it look like if we have a social platform where we have all kinds of people with all kinds of ideas who want to see the platform run in different ways? Well, what would a due process look like for appointing representatives or having a direct democracy, whatever it might be? What are the concrete suggestions to turn these platforms that I would argue function as commons, and therefore should be evaluated and understood as commons? What would it look like if we as users weren't just exploitable, but had a way to impact the governance, impact the leadership, and make the rules? So essentially, what does it look like to take us from digital inhabitants to digital citizens? There are no physical streets to go out and protest on, but there are collaborative documents where we can write things together, where we have created Wikipedia together and many other beautiful collaborative projects. Is that the equivalent to protesting in the streets, to creating something in a document? Maybe. Regardless, this is an obvious vacuum and a space for legal professionals to come in and show the way and write up what that way could look like. And then it becomes so clear, such a stark contrast, what is lacking right now. So it's like we need to create the blueprint for what ought to be there, so that we can present them just like we present, do we want to be digital inhabitants or would we rather be empowered citizens? And then when you have those two options articulated, then and only then is it just to ask people to make a choice, because then it's an informed choice of what it is that we don't have right now. Because I think, as in the case with many things, when we are suffering or when we are lacking, the first step is always to dare to acknowledge that there is something that is missing. And we haven't even gotten there yet. People still think that data and giving up data is about privacy, whereas it's about power. It's about who gets to control you, who gets to predict you. And so this is overdue for a change. And there is no greater moment than right now to start changing that. So I invite anyone who is a legal professional and who want to work on this in a very concrete manner together with me to reach out. That's it. Then we have to thank you.
Thank you, Carin, for enlightening us on that and bringing up some really interesting and I think pressing topics. I think topics that many of us might not even be aware of just how important you know, these questions actually are, these questions of power and how it's distributed in the digital world. My first question to you, Carin, is, well, who actually has the authority, or who should have the authority to sort of tell these platforms what they should be doing? So when they're retaining all of this power, who has the power over them?
Yeah, that's the thing. Right now, I would argue no one does, because they are, of course, many of them are registered in a certain physical jurisdiction, and they must abide by the rules either there or in all the different regions where they're operational. We have seen this with GDPR, that forced many platforms to change their practices. But we also know that they have kept so much of their algorithms opaque, so much of their plans opaque, that we don't really know what's going on. And that's the basis for the asymmetry in power and the asymmetry of who can predict which behavior. So the real answer is no one really is. But it's not going to be a matter of someone telling them what to do. That's why we as the users need to move. I would say we have to exit. And we have to exit to platforms that operate with another business model or with another model altogether, because it's not even necessarily that it has to be operated as a for-profit business, although that could be possible too. But right now, the goals of the platforms and the goals of the users aren't aligned. And that's fine when it's a matter of our entertainment, but when it's a matter of our entire lives, it starts to become very, very, very troublesome. And right now, we're I would argue at the 50-50 place, where it's about a lot of our lives, but not our entire lives.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and I wonder, you know, what it's going to take for those of us who are so sort of entrenched into these platforms and the value that they provide, for us to take a stand and say, hey, well, this is not actually what is right for the world. So how would you try to convey to those of us, you know, who are using some of these data mining services, to tell us why it's actually important for us to be conscious about the decisions that we make, about the platforms that we use?
So I think it's sort of like with asking someone to give up meat. I don't think that's fair if you are brought up in a culture where that is very key to how you do life, until you're able to offer an alternative. So as soon as you can say, you know, this is the Whopper that tastes the same, the excuses start to go away. And it's the same thing here. We can't ask people. I don't think people should ever have to make sacrifices. And so in this, or very, very few sacrifices, and especially when it comes to what these platforms are exploiting, which is our longing for one another. And that's a beautiful thing that we definitely shouldn't give up. And I'm very skeptical as soon as people talk about, you know, taking social media breaks or whatever. That to me is a clear example of that we haven't found a way to just get the good stuff without the bad stuff, but we shouldn't give up the good stuff. So essentially it's about creating better platforms. And the platforms exist, but I think here is where influencers come in, because it's influencers that could lead us through the desert sort of here, because they have the following. So I want to see unionized influencers who leave together. We have so many influencers that are frustrated with the platforms that are on, and some of them do leave. It's like seeing the ones that went from YouTube to Patreon or things like that. But to actually make the case for why you should leave to something that has a better ownership structure, the case is very clear. It's like, if you don't like something, there should be a way for you to change it. That's it. If you don't like that Instagram gives you pictures in another order than you would like to see them, you should get to choose. That's it.
Absolutely right. I totally agree with you there. And another question that sort of arose in me, Carin, is how do you think that now that so many of us are thinking within this cyberspace or this dematerialized world of how we can best sort of construct or create the architecture for the power within the cyberspace, how do you think that that thinking can actually inform how we orchestrate, sort of how we architecture the power in the physical world?
So I think this is where the nation state is starting to look very obsolete. Like, what is it there for? What is this strange layer? What is this strange layer? Because it's like a local governance of the waste in the streets, on the power distribution, like to have electricity on, everything that is micro, everything that surrounds me, you know, all of those things, like to get functioning water, all of those things make so much sense. You govern those, you take care of those on that local level. And then you have the global risks. You have to. I mean, it's absurd that we're currently combating this global virus through local efforts. Obviously, for pandemics, for asteroids, for supervolcanoes, for nuclear winter, global risks require global coordination, definitely. But where is this nation level? Like, what is the relevance of that if we really break it down? Like, what is it that is supposed to be handled on that level? Give me one example. Give me one. And so it's when we start to connect ourselves to one another, as we have already, but when we're able to legalize, like, so let's be very concrete. If I get sick in Sweden, where I was lucky enough to really luck out in the nation state lottery known as birth, I got a great passport and I got great healthcare, all of that stuff, complete luck. But that's the system of solidarity that I'm supposed to belong to. So I pay my taxes to all the other people who got lucky in that very same way. Now, how about I didn't get so lucky? Or how about, as is the case for me, I don't think that this is fair. And I want to instead create that kind of safety net, that kind of brilliant security system where I do pay some version of taxes or some version of, let's call it crowdsource. I want to crowdfund so that everyone can, if someone is unlucky and get sick, then they can tap into that pool that I've been a part of crowdfunding into. But I would want to do that with people who want to give as much of their income as I want to live, as I want to give. I want to tie myself together with people who I care about. And it shouldn't have to be the ones that just were on the same territory, but people who I actually share something with. And this is a system, this kind of like, no, I'm not going to just tie myself to the people who happen to be in the same territory. I'm going to tie myself to the people who I feel a tie to, who I feel a connection to. That's the actuality of how people are living right now, because the remittances, the people who go somewhere and live under horrible conditions to send money back to people on another territory, that's huge. That's how people constantly challenge the nation state construct. Solidarity, just like emissions, don't stop at a border that we drew in the sometimes sand, sometimes not even that, sometimes completely virtually. We are so capable of caring for people that are not in the same nation state. And that is indeed, coming back to your question, that's what these systems are going to show us more and more that we can. It's also people who are right now like giving money to crowdfunding campaigns for someone who is sick in another part of the world, just because they connected to that person via a video. That's the actuality of our capacity to emphasize. The nation state doesn't really, you know, I haven't heard the nation state tell me a good argument for its existence in a long time. The nation state has to speak to me more.
Yeah, right. Well, I think as you're showing us and telling us, well, there's a lot of things that need to be updated and rethought of how things are structured in the world. My final short question to you, Carin, is before we wrap up, is so this summit is about negotiating the new normal, and you are fully immersed in the world of technology and sort of these questions of how that's shaping our lives and how we're shaping it and should be shaping it. Could you maybe very briefly describe to us what you think the new normal will feel like? What will it be like in your sort of ideal vision? Just give us a sense of how you're thinking about it.
I love that question. What will it feel like? I think that's a very often forgotten question, because whether or not the future or the current state, whether or not anything is good or bad, comes down currently still, as we are bodies with sensors, to how it feels. To me, it should feel very pleasurable. I like the solar punk vision aesthetically. It's like the future comes down to aesthetics. It's this. If you're not familiar with, or if anyone isn't familiar with solar punk, I would urge anyone to Google solar punk, Afrofuturism. Those are the images that are compelling to me. That's when it just looks so cool and pretty, and you can tell that it smells really good and that it's just pleasant. That's the future. And it's like the, I don't remember the name. There is a wonderful thinker who said, and I'm sure many people have said this, but that the job of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And that's what I think it has to be. It has to be so beautiful and fun that you can't resist.
That sounds wonderful, Carin, and it sounds like a new normal that I want to be a part of. A fun, pleasurable normal that is just and takes care of everyone and respects the lives of everyone and the planet that we live on. So, Carin, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this this summit and for joining us here today. And now we're moving on to the next conversation that will take place here, which I believe is about the privacy by design in about 10 minutes. So for all of you here who'd like to stay and join Rishi and Dr. Ann Kuvakian, then you're more than welcome to stay here. But thanks again, Carin, for joining us. It was really a pleasure, and hope to hear more of what you have to share soon.
Thank you.
Before you leave, Carin, may I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So my question is, I do like your statement about the involvement of the changes and so forth. But can we also think about the countries that are not involved digitally? Like, how will we implement them?
Absolutely. I mean, currently we're at 51% of the internet. It's so low. It's half the world population that I'm completely leaving out when I'm talking like this. And the reason I'm talking like this is because that half of the world is coming online, although slowly. This is going to become a reality for everyone because of projects that are either exploring satellites or exploring, they're essentially the economic incentives to get everyone online are there already. It's, if you want to be extremely crass about it, it's about how many people, the more people are online, the more people can you sell ads to, kind of thing. Or so that is going to happen, which is why I think it's very key to plan and to create these systems of solidarity that work in the dematerialized world, as far as that dematerialized world has spread so far. So to me, it's like, if we, it's two very interlinked questions, but when it comes to one part, which is getting all human beings to be a part of the digital ecosystem, that is already, the incentives are there. But when it comes to creating like platform cooperativism, the incentives are not there. So that's why I think it's very important to build that, or else everyone's going to end up living in a virtual dictatorship, and that's what I very much want to avoid.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any final question for Carin? Because I think there's only a couple minutes left. Otherwise, I think we should close off and make space for the next talk. Great. Anyone? Last takers? No, I don't think so. Carin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.